Alright guys, we're going to finish up our chapter 2 on the cells here. We're going to start talking about organs, and then we're going to talk about body cavities and what's in different body cavities. Okay. As we talked about earlier, organs, they are a collection of tissues that work together to perform a certain task. Think about the heart. It's got connective tissues in it that open and close the valves. It's got muscular tissue, but its primary purpose is to pump blood. Okay. So again, your skin contains all four types of tissues and is again the largest organ in the body. I would probably remember that little factoid. You're going to see that one a little bit later. Organ systems, again, they usually have a common purpose. Think about it, your digestive system, all the different components of that. It's got the digestive enzymes, which help break down food, the muscular organs to help physically tear down food, and then it's got different layers to where it absorbs the food, connections with the circulatory system, so it can then be transported. So all of these, in combination, the various organ systems, they again form an organism, which is the living thing. And the human organism, again, is a very complex. A lot of things to go wrong within the human body. As you guys have probably already learned on your clinical assignments, that again, there's a lot of things can go wrong that can cause a person to feel bad or not feel correct. So again, these are an overlay of all the different types of organs and their interconnectivity. So your body regions, and I'm kind of big on this one. The axial region is the head, neck, and trunk. The appendicular is anything not the head, neck, and trunk. Any of their girdles or their extremities are considered part of the appendicular region or the appendicular the skeleton. Girdles are bony structures that attach limbs to the body. Your shoulder girdle, pelvic girdle, those are examples of those. Again, your axilla, by the way, is inferior to the shoulder, known as the armpit, and the antecubital fossa is the bend at the elbow. Hopefully you guys have been poking those to death while you've been doing your IVs. The appendicular region, again, is usually the lower extremities. It's the thighs, the ankles, the foot, and the popliteal fossa is behind the knee. Okay? Again, where it bends. Your head, again, the scalp is the skin layer that's on the head. It's got the 5 layers. The skin, the subcutaneous tissue, the muscle, or the adipose, the loose connective tissue, and then the periosteum, which is that part that actually covers the skull, the thin layer that covers it. Again, this is the skin of the scalp, and then the bone of the scalp. And then underneath those, by the way, there are 3 layers down here in the brain known as the meninges, the dura mater, the arachnoid, and the pia mater. I remember it by the term DAP. It's just D is on the very outside, P is on the inside. Okay. Your meninges, again, we just talked about those, and the periosteum is the membrane that covers the outside of the skull and all of the bones. Okay. So most of your bones have a periosteum. So again, that is where it is covered. It's not just like a skeleton like you would normally see it. The periosteum actually has a more shiny layer to it. Again, the skull houses the brain. Again, you got the cranium and the facial bones in there. The bones of the skull are connected together as sutures. I would probably know what a suture is. And then fontanelles, I would definitely know what those are. Usually the fontanelles are the spaces, especially when a child is born. Again, this helps it get through the birth canal. These usually seal up. This one back here usually seals up within 6 to 9 months. This one somewhere around the 2-year mark, but usually after 6 to 7 months, it's formed enough where you can't actually feel it without sitting there and probing. But when they're younger, again, this is a great place to check to see if they're dehydrated or not, is whether or not this is bulging or whether it's sunken in. Your neck, the 3 major triangles lie within the neck. You got anterior, your carotid triangle, and the posterior triangle. Again, your trunk is the thorax, the abdomen, and the pelvis. That is known as the body's trunk. So again, and they have different areas as far as the chest cavity. In the abdominal cavity, there's also a retroperitoneal cavity back in this generalized area. Now your other body cavities, again, we talked about the retroperitoneal, the abdominal cavity, and the thoracic cavity separated at the diaphragm. I probably would know that little factoid. And again, your cranial cavity along with the spinal cavity. The spinal cavity, by the way, is inside the vertebral column down to about L2. This one goes way down there. But again, usually the spinal cord actually goes to around the L2 area. Your cranial cavity, the hollow portion of the skull, it's got a dome cap and it houses the brain. The problem is, guys, is there's no place for it to expand except for down through here. So when you get swelling in this area, the biggest problem we have is that there's a little bit of fluid in there that it bathes in, and it can kind of serve as a space absorber. However, once that area fills up, it squishes out, and then at that point it starts going out the foramen magnum, or as I like to call it, the Play-Doh Fun Factory, because that's what it's doing. It's literally being pushed out, known as a herniation syndrome, which usually causes that high blood pressure, low heart rate, and the erratic breathing. Again, when it starts getting the brain, the area that controls the breathing comes out the foramen magnum. Again, at that point, yeah, you're looking at some trouble. Again, the spinal cavity, we already talked about that one there. The serous membrane is a specialized thin connective tissue, and again, it's the parietal portion which lines the wall of the cavity. Visceral lines the organs. Okay, remember the way that I remember this is it's VO. You remember VO, that means it's on the organ. Okay, the parent lies on the outside. Think of as the parent as the protector. So it lies on the outside of the cavity wall. And they have different types of pain, especially when we're talking about abdominal pain. Parietal and visceral pains are different. Okay, again, and the serous membranes, they can protect the organs, the internal ones, from having friction with each other. So it does serve a very important purpose. Your thoracic cavity, again, is the base of the neck down to the diaphragm, and it's circular boundary that is the rib cage. If you can think of what's inside the rib cage, that's pretty much your thoracic cavity. And again, it holds your major organs, which is your heart and lungs. And then remember that the lungs are surrounded by a pleura. For that matter, the cardiac muscle is surrounded by a two-layer sac as well, pericardial sac. So the pleural space, by the way, is between the visceral and the parietal pleura, and this cavity is a potential space. So sometimes you can get lubricating fluid in there, or called pleural fluid. A lot of the times that gets infected, it dries up, and then you get rubbing of that. So we hear that rub, that sandpaperish type rub. That's where you hear it, is in the pleural space. Now the middle of the chest, known as the mediastinum, holds the heart, the trachea, the main stem bronchus, part of the esophagus, and the large blood vessels. Okay, that's what it holds. All right, and we talk about this, and when we get a problem with this is usually when we have a mediastinal shift. When the lungs is collapsed, it's pressurizing. There's too much pressure from the heart filling up with blood because it's in between the two layers of the pericardial sac. It extends the mediastinum. So you're going to see this, and when you're looking at x-rays, that little outline that you see where the heart is at, that is your mediastinum in that area. Your pericardial cavity, again, is the heart. It is surrounded by the pericardium. It's a very serous membrane. It's a very fibrous membrane, and it will hold blood if there's a leak from the inner that leaks out into that area. And the region surrounding the heart is called the pericardial cavity. Yes, it can get infected. Yes, it can have a lot of extra fluid in there. Okay, so remember that, and these are things that are going to cause interfering with the pump. Okay, it will do that. Your abdominal cavity extends from the diaphragm down to the pelvic bones. There's a peritoneum in there, and then the mesentery is the double fold of tissue in the abdomen, which attaches the various organs to the body wall. And again, when we refer to the mesentery, it's usually very vascular as well, and it supplies the blood to the abdominal organs. Okay, and your abdominal cavity can be divided into quadrants, and then of course the umbilicus, which again was your initial connection with life with mom. We know that as the navel. And again, some people have an innie, some have an outie, depends on how it worked out when they cut the cord. Retroperitoneal space, it's behind it. Usually that's where your kidneys, pancreas, and some of your small intestine is, as well as the blood vessels that supply those areas. And these structures are referred to as the retroperitoneal organ. Your aorta and vena cava are all retroperitoneal organs. All right. Your pelvic cavity, usually it's bound by the pelvic girdle, in which are the three bones, the ilium, the ischium, the pubis symphysis. The sacrum and the coccyx is where the spine joins in with that. And it usually provides protection for some of the gastrointestinal organs, the reproductive organs, and of course the urinary system. So what happens when we get cellular injury? And it can result from a lot of things. Somebody got sprayed with a chemical. Physically being damaged when you damage the tissue, you bruise the tissue. An inflammatory disease. Patient gets poison ivy. Can it cause potentially problems? Yes. Hypoxia. It has to have oxygen to live. If it doesn't have oxygen, cells begin to die. Okay. The actual death of the tissue. Remember, tissue does die. Every now and then it doesn't replace itself. So these are things that can cause problems. All right. So all of these things can cause it. Again, by the way, hypoxia can be caused from a lot of different things. Not enough red blood cells. There's loss of the hemoglobin's function. If you have a respiratory or cardiac disease, if they lose cytochromes, all of these things can cause hypoxia. Okay, all of them can result in tissue death. Okay, leads to more death, which leads to more hypoxia, and then further widespread problems. Okay, chemical injury, again, something that's not there, should not be there, but is. Your chemical injuries, remember, like cyanide, it causes hypoxia because it blocks the ability of the mitochondria for actually metabolizing the oxygen. Matter of fact, death from cyanide is actually fairly quick, as a matter of fact. Pesticides that can, again, stop proper nerve transpulsion, and that's one of the biggest problems with our pesticides, is that they affect our central nervous system and the nerve impulse transmission. Infectious diseases, again, bacteria, fungi, viruses, any of those can result in an infection. Okay, and by the way, got to be treated differently. And viruses also initiate an inflammatory response. It causes cell damage to other systems. Okay, remember, it's basically the messenger RNA going into the nucleus and changing the functions of the cell. Okay, where bacteria kind of attack the cell, if you will. Same way with fungal infections will do that as well. And not to say that one is worse than the other, because again, all of them can be potentially fatal. Inflammation, by the way, is a normal process that helps us with repair. Okay, so an inflammation response is not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be. It can actually cause more problems. Okay, and the immune system again provides a protection for us, but if you get one that's hyper alert, if you will, again, that's your cause for an anaphylactic reaction. Is the effect of causing an exaggerated response. Cellular membranes, again, they can be indirect or direct. It contains the chemicals, the compounds, and again, so you can have problems with it trying to absorb it or actually releasing histamines, and histamines usually cause an inflammation response, which is why, by the way, usually when we have an anaphylactic reaction, one of the other drugs that we give is something to block that histamine reaction. Okay? Swelling occurs as potassium leaks out of the cell and water flows inward. Okay? And usually, again, as we talked about in the cell part of it, you can cause the cell to actually burst, or it causes it to rupture because basically the cell membrane can't hold it in anymore. And then, of course, that releases additional materials into the bloodstream, which can go on to get other cells. So again, there's some other things that also influence cell injury or death. There are genetic factors. Nutritional imbalances can cause this. Physical agents, yes, we can have things introduced to our system. If you stop and think about it, a COVID vaccination is an example of a physical agent that is introduced. And obviously, it's not going to cause injury or death, but it simulates that material so that they can develop a defense for it. Okay, so something to think about is, again, that's the way that the immune response actually is supposed to work. You can have chromosomal disorders, by the way. A Down syndrome is when they have an extra chromosome actually involved. They can have actually abnormal gene development. That usually happens during meiosis, and it's a heredity problem in which that happens. Nutritional imbalances can also, it's very good for helping to fight disease, but if you have some of these other things, obesity, malnutrition, vitamin excesses or deficiencies, or minerals excess or deficiency, it can cause problems. So yeah, downing the bottle of Flintstones vitamins is not necessarily a good thing. Get too much, it can cause problems. Remember, they can also have physical agents, the burning of, having a burned skin or muscle or bone. You can actually have them frozen, again, frostbites, and then radiation can also cause physical problems to your organs as well. That's going to do it for this this particular slideshow. Again, make sure you read your books. That's kind of important on this one. And I will see you guys on the next video.